And good evening to the Suppress Herald podcast. And it is July 2nd, Wednesday, hump day, July 4th week, busy, busy times. And just feel compelled. This is a little bit, you know, higher velocity than previous podcasts, usually about once a week, but just feel compelled to put this out there. Of course, we're going into the July 4th weekend. Here we are in Maine, a lot of very consequential things going on. And there's just a few things that happen with the Suppress Herald, the propaganda sheet that is basically providing a very significant portion of the news to the people of Maine and has very, very significant impact on what a lot of people are thinking, especially you have to remember Maine is one of the call it oldest states in the country. A lot of seniors in homes and retirement, they like to have a paper. And this paper is nothing but a propaganda sheet. And they prove it every day that they put the paper out. So we're going to just get started. I want to start in with, a couple of just tidbits, and then I've got a much larger conversation to have about the propaganda that's going on in our country, the battles going on in our country, and just my own theory on where we are and how things are so messed up. And I think that you'll find it very, very interesting if you stick around and listen through to the end when I talk about what I call my four pillars of destruction of the United States. And I think it's not everybody's looking at one culprit, one organization, one group, one whatever you want to call it, that are looking to take down our country. And I think there's multiple facets of that, and we'll talk about that. I'll lead into that. But I want to start with something that's very, very elemental, and that is racism in America. And we wonder why it still is such a prominent aspect of the conversation, the political conversation, the social construct in America, all based on race. When the reality is, the mass majority of the population of the United States are never subjected to racism in any significant form. People have biases. People have biases about the way you look. People have biases about what a white woman looks like, what I look like. People may say I'm not an attractive person. Fine. Biases exist, but racism is a whole different ballgame. But here we have, and this has been a very exciting time in Maine, we have a very, very prominent young man, Cooper Flagg, who is 18, well, 19 years old now, and just got drafted number one in the NBA draft. And that's a pretty huge deal. 1 year at Duke, left high school early, 17 years old. He started playing at Duke, turned 18 during the season. Now he's 19 and he's in the NBA. And he went number one. First Maine kid to go anywhere near that level in the NBA draft. So it's a huge deal. So, never to miss an opportunity, the Suppress Herald Fact Group, okay, this is the Maine Trust for Local News Fact Brief. I talked about a previous podcast where they had got a fact-checking group organized so that we can really make sure that we only give the people what we want them to hear. Bottom line. So the fact-checking group, a fact brief, And here is the question. Is Cooper Flagg the first white American picked number one in the NBA draft since 1977? And you know what? I'm not going to go any further than that. Why are we talking about Cooper Flagg's race when he was picked number one in the NBA draft? Who, if you are not racist, then you don't give a rat's ass what his race is. He's just an incredible kid, and every indication is he's also an incredible human being. And that's it. He's a human being. Shut up. They've got to play the race card on every opportunity. It's bullshit. And this is the suppress Herald, and this is the liberal whack jobs who run it. Why do we have a racist column, racist story in the suppress Herald? It's despicable. But you know what? That's the race baiters and the race industry. They have to perpetuate it because otherwise they got nothing. So there's the suppress Herald disgusting us in their way. And of course, we haven't talked about in the Suppress Herald podcast, I haven't had a chance to jump into climate change recently. They kind of dropped that because there was so much, Trump's got them so much off balance. They can't keep up and they can't catch their breath. So climate change sort of dropped to the wayside. And other than bitching about, the fact that he's going to make us energy independent and he's, looking to drop the whole bill with all these Green New Deal scams. And I've talked about that as well. The reality is I took advantage of those scams. It'd be stupid not to. But the reality is net metering and huge tax credits for solar. Let me tell you what the reality is, and the people in the industry won't like me. All it does is add cost to putting on solar. It's kind of like this. Remember what they said when Trump said he's going to put a big tariff on Chinese goods coming into this country. And everybody screamed bloody murder and said that inflation's going to explode and we're just going to see massive increases in prices. Well, let me tell you something. What happened? Chinese goods kept coming. They didn't slow down. People are still getting their Chinese shit. And the reality is, China was making so much money that they just cut the price. And so now the tariffs, even with the tariffs on, the price isn't up. Well, that's exactly what you're seeing with solar and wind and geothermal and heat pumps and all of it. The entire supply chain has been getting rich off of us, the taxpayers, that are funding these incentives to put in heat pumps, to put in solar, all the rest of it. So what happened? They have a bill to take out the Green New Deal. And here come the articles. Here come the climate change information in the mainstream media, which is propaganda. They have to try and get the whole Green New Deal back or prevent the House from abandoning it. And they may be successful. Ancient Himalayan village relocates as climate change reshapes daily life. Well, let me tell you, the Himalayas are covered with glaciers, massive glaciers. Everybody that's seen anything with going to Everest knows that you climb over massive glaciers, massive amounts of ice and snow over the top of these mountains. And if you put an ice cube in your fridge, even if you leave your fridge closed and it works 100% of the time, and the temperature is always below freezing, the ice cube is going to shrink. That's glaciers. They're always going to be growing or shrinking, and they're going to cycle. And that has always happened. And what they don't tell you, they're telling you here with this article that this village in the Himalaya, very small village in a very remote place along a river, and the river is coming from the glaciers and it's drying up. And woe is me. Things are always going to change in those environments. They could be covered with ice in 100 years. And then the story will be ancient Himalayan village relocates as the glacier inundates their town. That could just as well be that story. What they don't tell you in this story is that the polar ice caps have been increasing mega tons. That's a whole lot of ice and snow increasing on the polar ice caps. They're not going to mention that in the Press Herald. You'll never see that in the Press Herald. Barcelona records hottest June. Eiffel Tower's summit closes. Here we go. There are the stories. They just happen to coincide with the House of Representatives voting to eliminate the Green New Deal incentives and tax breaks for wind and solar and all the rest. Isn't that interesting? The whole thing ramps up with papers across the country, all being fed by a central distribution point. There are organizations that gather and write all these articles that get distributed to all these propaganda outlets, and it all at once hits the American people. And they're doing the same thing on social media. They're doing the same thing across the entire spectrum of the propaganda platforms to sway public opinion. But they're never going to tell you that there is another side to that story. And there are Nobel Prize winning physicists and scientists, MIT, Princeton scientists, and beyond that are all weighing in saying, wait a minute, CO2 is not a bad thing. But you'll never hear that because they hide that. And that's where we're at. And then I want to introduce a new section of my podcast. This is a new add-on. We have a local organization and a local individual that do podcasts and news reports and have a Substack channel to get actual reporting and news out. Steve Robinson from the Robinson Report here in Maine has been doing stellar work as an actual reporter, going out and doing actual journalism, doing investigative reporting. He's the one who broke the story about the Chinese grow facilities buying up real estate across northern rural Maine and in the boondocks, buying houses and buildings and turning them into grow facilities and making hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, run by Chinese mafia, basically. The mainstream media didn't even talk about it, and they dropped it pretty quickly. Kind of interesting. So the Robinson Report is a phenomenal local news reporting organization or group. Small but agile and actually tells the truth and gives people in Maine things that are relevant, but which the mainstream media, including the Suppress Herald, will not tell you. They want to cover it up. Anything to do with criminal, illegal aliens, crimes committed by illegal immigrants, issues with schools with illegal immigrants, homelessness and housing problems with illegal immigrants. We don't want to talk about that. Now, here's a new one. The Suppress Herald has all sorts of articles about the huge bill passing through the House and the Senate, just cleared the Senate, going back to the House, final wording. And of course, this is the last ditch effort to derail it at the House. And I'm praying that the House just bites the bullet and gets this across the finish line, and we can move on to doing the next things and making more things better. But all the articles in the paper the last few days have been basically saying that the big bill is going to be causing Medicaid, people lose their insurance, people right down to people dying. Hospitals, every aspect of society is going to be negatively affected by this new legislation. What they don't tell you is that the average middle income person, family in Maine is going to see thousands of dollars preserved in their paycheck, that if they didn't pass this bill, their taxes would jump up significantly. All of a sudden, you'd lose $5,000, $10,000. That goes a long way to paying the ever increasing local, school, county taxes, keeping up with what this state of Maine keeps raising on us. And so you have a situation where they're writing nothing but negative about this bill, Medicaid loss, and everything else. Then what comes across is a story that the Suppress Herald, and I have been checking the paper every day, the Suppress Herald has not even mentioned it. And what it says is, what the Robinson Report is telling us is this. The Trump administration announced Monday a massive fraud investigation that has resulted in 324 defendants facing charges for more than 14.6 billion with a B in welfare and healthcare fraud. And we have a local who's mixed up in that, part of an international crime ring slated to take $14.6 billion in welfare and Medicaid, Medicare fraud. They're a massive organized organization, and this is likely just one of many. And we're worried about people being taken off Medicaid. When they cut the budget, they are anticipating that they're going to get these people. DOJ has identified fraud and abuse, and they're catching these people, and they're catching hundreds of billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse. This budget is going to take into account all of the people they're going to find out were ripping you and me off. And you know what's despicable? The Suppress Herald is not going to tell you. They are not going to let you know that this is happening, that there is billions and billions of dollars in fraud from these people are overseas. They're in third world countries operating this massive fraud ring to steal from the American people. Because under Biden, there were no checks and balances and nobody was looking. They were more worried about MAGA voters than they were about massive fraudsters from overseas and across our country robbing us blind. No worry about that. That's come to an end. But you will not see it in the Suppress Herald. Which brings me to my last point, and this is what I'm going to finish up. I'm going to do this quickly. The Suppress Herald I've talked about is owned by billionaires. The National Distrust for Local News is a nonprofit with George Soros and Bill Gates and Claude Omijar and others and other nonprofit socialist, communist, just organizations all got their money together and are buying up local newspapers so they can control what the word gets out. Specifically, things like a fraud ring ripping off the American people to the tune of billions of dollars. They're not going to tell you about that. Now, why is that? They want open borders. They want poverty. They want mayhem. They want to cause massive disruption in our country. They want to ruin our country. And everybody talks about, the deep state or, on and on. I actually think there are at least four pillars of this whole movements to undermine the good graces of the United States and the people of the United States. There's the age old, they've been around forever. They're the ones that put the central bank in place. We could go back and look at all sorts of, Jekyll Island and beyond. The deep state, which is the criminal banking element from London and New York City and beyond. The bankers are the globalists. They want to control the money, they want to control you. But I don't think there's only one entity that's after our sanity in this country. I think there are at least four. I think you got the techies. Bill Gates, multi-billionaire, one time was the richest man in the world, and he also controlled computers and, with Windows and Microsoft, he owned people's minds. And anybody who listens to him looks at a megalomaniac who is injecting people, experimenting on kids in Africa for drugs and other very, very crazy things that only a megalomaniac would do. That's Bill Gates. And you've got Mark Zuckerberg, and I don't have to talk about him. He spent $400 million stealing the 2020 election. You've got Elon Musk. Don't think for a minute that the richest man on earth doesn't have a little bit of an ego. And you're seeing this friction with Trump. And I think that the reality is he saw where power was and he went to it. And he's another techie. He's got AI. And these people, he's got X. And that is mind control. Just plain and simple. If you can manipulate what people are seeing and hearing and all the rest, you can win minds. So you have the globalist bankers, the techies, and then there are the communist, Islamic socialist crazies. There's no question they're out there. You're seeing it everywhere. Ocasio-Cortez and this new jackass in New York City who's got a degree from right here in Maine, and I've talked about this in a podcast. He went to school at Bowdoin College and was, Bowdoin College, the liberal feeding ground for radicals here in Maine. He has a degree in Africana studies. That's the guy who's going to run New York City. So that's another organization, and we're finding out that we've got the Muslim Brotherhood. That's the Muslim side of it. You've got socialists, you've got all of that. Just trying to take the country down in general. And then the fourth leg is George and Alex Soros. Very simply, George Soros is another demented, sick megalomaniac. He's taken down countries' currency. He's taken down countries. He is all by himself funded massive amounts of disruption and chaos. He was all behind Black Lives Matter, not to stand up for black people, but to tear down America and to use them as pawns. That's George Soros. So we've got those four, and there may be more, but basically, that's what I think's going on here. Is I think we have a battle going on, and we're just the pawns that they're fighting over. They want to control us, and Trump is leading us to stand up and say no. And that's as simple as it gets. It gets a little easier to understand if you realize that it's not one or two entities, it's multiple entities, and they're fighting over controlling our lives and winning power and control over us. Simple as that. And some of them are manipulating local news, like the suppress Herald, as I say. There's a fight for propaganda as well, competing messages, trying to leverage their way and get their way into power with any means necessary. So here we are, Little Maine, with the Little Suppress Herald doing its part. And that's something to keep in mind, is that there's a lot of suppress heralds out there. There are hundreds, thousands of local newspapers that are they already were pretty much predominantly run by liberals, because the colleges that produce the people in the industry were all brainwashing them in socialism and liberalism and so forth. So you've got a situation where now they're getting them organized. And here we have a bill going through Congress talking about getting rid of the Green New Deal, and up pop the global warming articles in all the newspapers across the country, all disseminated out of one or two offices. Put this in your paper. They got an email list. They send their article, they send their editorials, and they get printed in all these little places, but they're all controlled by one or two entities driving the narrative. And they almost convinced us that boys could be girls and girls could be boys. I think we are getting past that. But they did a pretty good job of getting well into that. You had a guy in swimming in UPenn winning a national championship in the women's swimming. He's a guy. I mean, they did a pretty amazing job, if you think about it, to convince millions of people to accept that. I think we're getting around the corner and we're going to say no to insanity and no to anything but common sense and reality. And that's the number one. So please share, please follow. I look forward to continuing to put up these podcasts and hope you'll share it with friends. Follow my feeds on Rumble or anywhere else. And have a great 4th of July. And we will see you on the other side.